Welcome to the Magic Show, everybody. I'm Reuben Bresler.
And I'm Nick Miller. We're filling in for Evan while he's on vacation.
We've got a good show lined up for you this week. We're going to talk about what cards we think are going to affect your local meta the most and the developments that have happened since the official release of Future Sight.
We're going to go over probably the most broken card in the format, along with some of the terrible new duels and how bad they suck.
And then we're going to give you guys a deck idea to mull over, see what you guys think about it. But first, Nick has a few words that he'd like to say.
Indeed. So I think I've got it all figured out, sitting back with my newly tinkered draw new control deck. And at the end of my turn, my opponent taps 3 mountains. Great, I'm thinking. He's going to play a Char and I can remand it and get a card out of this. But all of a sudden, he says, Sulfur Elemental. And I say, son of a there's nothing I can do to stop that. You know, now I'm going to have to waste a Mystical Teachings for a sudden death, or use Damnation next turn to get rid of a 3-2, and I'm on a 7-turn clock. Now, a 3-2 on paper doesn't sound like that much of a problem, especially with a white ability when you're playing a blue-black control deck. But the problem comes in if you're playing Izzatron. You have to find a way to get your elimination spell under their own control spells, unless you're blessed to have a sudden death in your opening hand. Now, this is the guy I hate to love to hate, and there's about 2 parties of people who play Sulfur Elemental. Those who play him, and those who run hate against those who play him. Now this is a guy I can't wait to see leave Standard, but unfortunately he's going to be around for a while, so either start packing him in your own deck, or know how to get around him.
But enough about Nick's personal problems. Let's talk about what really matters. Future Sight. First up, let's talk about Aven Mind Sensor. Now I'm going to say something surprising, so everybody have a seat while I say it. Aven Mind Sensor is going to make Martyr playable again.
There is no way Martyr is going to be played again.
Come on.
No. While the ability on Aven Mind Sensor might stop Extirpate from just completely eradicating Martyr from your deck, Sulfur Elemental is still going to kill both of them. You know, but... well, unless you're running Sunlance, but who's running Sunlance? Though it's obviously the answer to Sulfur Elemental.
That's true, it is the Silver Bullet. But come on, you gotta, I mean, not every deck is running Sulfur Elemental. So until 100% of the decks run Sulfur Elemental, I expect to see a couple of Martyr decks. Now, I'm not saying it's going to make a top 8 anytime soon, but what I am saying is you're going to play it in the early rounds.
Yeah, you can see it.
More importantly, Aven Mind Sensor completely hoses Mystical Teachings and Dragonstorm.
Well, I mean, unless they're playing Sulfur Elemental. I mean, Mystical Teachings isn't obviously going to run it, but it's probably just going to counter it.
Yeah. There will come a day when every deck will run for Sulfur Elemental.
Next up is a card Evan spoiled last week on how it's just absolutely going to wreck the metagame, and that's Bridge from Below. This card single-handedly is going to ramp up dredge decks into top 8s everywhere.
Yeah, and it's just, the card is just so ridiculous, because the first time I looked at it, I realized it had no abilities while it was in play. Now, I mean, come on now. You should have, if it's not going to have any abilities, at least put it on a creature so you can cast it. It just shouldn't even have a casting cost if you're not even going to play it. It's just so ridiculous.
Yeah, pick this card up, you know, while you can, cheap, while everyone's getting them. I mean, I was able to get one for a Sliver Legion, and that's a pretty bomb trade because Sliver Legion won't even see play in Sliver decks.
Luckily, WotC had the foresight to print the perfect Silver Bullet against Bridge from Below in the same set, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is Yixla Jailer. This guy is ridiculous. I mean, Flores might think that he's going to be lining the quarter bins since he hoses entire archetypes. But seeing as he can take out all the flashback cards, all the dredge cards, Bridge from Below, I mean, anything, I think he hoses goes into graveyard abilities. I'm not sure. I'll need a judge ruling on that. But it's just completely ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, this guy is going to have to be countered immediately. He kills Mystical Teachings. He stops, you know, Call the Herd flashback tokens. Stops Angel, what's the red-white angel?
Oh, the frickin' Firemane.
Firemane Angel doesn't hurt you anymore from, you know, the graveyard. This guy, get him.
Yeah, he's really ridiculous. I mean, he doesn't stop Sins from the Past. And that's really about it. But what's the last time you saw Sins from the Past? I mean, he's a 2/1 creature, which is even for 2 mana, which is even better. So that he can also beat face. He's going to replace Dark Confidant when they cycle out, and you're going to start playing arenas, but you're going to have the beat stick in the deck anyway. Pick up 4 now before they hit 250 apiece. And now, ladies and gentlemen, your Evan Irwin moment of the week.
Holy crap, ladies and gentlemen, this card is frickin' ridiculous.
This card is a house, like with a mortgage and a porch and 3 kids and everything.
I mean, just look at this thing. If it is not completely and utterly redonk, I don't know what is.
All kidding aside, Confiscate was playable up to a point, but blue counter magic was just so strong that it just stopped being playable. But with this, you can sneak right under another blue mage's nose. You can take a Loxodon Hierarch without it being sacrificed. I mean, there's so many good uses for this thing.
Yeah, I mean, 6 mana might be a lot, but in a long control game, for 1 more, you're going to get, something that can take a Teferi right out of someone's play, and slap it right back at their own face.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird to say, but this card is worth tapping out in a blue control deck for. You're going to see a lot of this card. Expect to see it very soon.
Next up is a card that I don't know if Storm needs to get any stronger right now, but definitely is going to turn some heads, and that's Grinning Angus. Explain it to us.
I mean, this card has a chance to be the most broken card out of the set, which is weird because it's a common. And think about the Locket of yesterday's Grinning Angus possibilities. If you had a good mana fixer to turn a colorless mana into red, you could go infinite Storm copies. And if you had 2 Lockets in play with a Grinning Angus, you could also get infinite mana with it. I mean, you would need a mana fixer, and you need that. I just don't know what to use for it. But it's definitely going to turn some heads with the extra mana that you have, with the storage lands and the Lotus Blooms in Storm. Next, we're going to talk about a card that's just an absolute bomb in Draft. And it has some interesting constructed possibilities, too.
This card's Merganda Petroglyphs. Now, I saw this as a 9th pick rare, so I decided to take a gamble on it. And it gives all your vanilla creatures +2/+2. So what you're thinking immediately is to, grab all those vanilla creatures that Future Sight pumped out. And, and I did that on top of that and brought in some other cards that can also be used, in a constructed format. But for the draft, I took 17 points of damage in an entire tournament. And, people can't deal with 3/3s every turn thanks to Sprout Swarm, which is a staple in the constructed deck. See this with Savannah Lions, Watchwolf, Thelanite Hermit just makes this card sickening in reality.
So let's take a look at an interesting deck idea that we have called Textless Tech. Enjoy.
If I had a dime for every time I heard my old man say one of these days I wouldn't be like my old man today, talking about places that he'd been back in his younger days that he was gonna go back to again one of these days.
Now, don't expect to see any Merganda Petroglyphs decks rocking top 8s at Nationals or at your local card shop tournaments, but it's a cool build, it's fun, and not a lot of people are going to see it coming.
I mean, sure, it walks basically right into Damnation and Wrath of Gods. Corrosive Grips basically takes the legs right out from under it, but, it's a fun deck to build. It's not too expensive. You don't have to use, Birds of Paradise and Flagstones and
Yeah,
things like
you
that.
can easily replace them with, Land of War Elves and Plains will work instead. So if you want to replace it with some of the cheaper cards, it's a lot easier to do. And if you do that, it's maybe, 10 cents to build. So if you replace it with the cheaper cards, it's a fun deck.
Yeah, and it's not meant to be taken ultra seriously. It's not going to rock the house by any means, but, pick it up and draft by all means.
Yeah, it's definitely a draft house.
Remember those lands I mentioned at the beginning of the show? Well, now we're going to go over what makes them so bad, and we'll start with the worst of them all. So River of Tears, aka Dawson's Creek, is easily the worst land of them all. I play blue-black control and don't even want this thing in my deck. First of all, who's tapping a land in a blue deck on the turn it comes into play anyway? This is basically, for all intents and purposes, a $7 island.
Next up, we got Grove of the Burn Willows. Now, If this card were blue-white, it would be amazing. But the fact of the matter is that you couldn't have picked a worse pair of colors to attach to this land ability.
Yeah, giving a green-red aggro deck a land that gives your opponent life defeats the purpose of playing the deck in the first place. How often do you get your opponent down to 3 or 4 life and then can't finish the job?
Yeah.
This is just going to make that a case even more so.
Yeah, it just exacerbates the problem. The sad fact of the matter is that no matter how cool the art is on Grove of the Burn Willows, it's not going to see any play.
Graven Cairns.
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 Cairns?
Cairns.
Whatever. We're just going to call it Bloody Mouth because it looks like the NGWK art. But correct me if I'm wrong, isn't this just a free signet?
Yeah, basically. And even worse than that, they already printed a land that's almost exactly like this back in Odyssey with the signet lands. I don't know why they thought it was going to work a second time. I really don't see it happening. The only thing that makes it better is that, first of all, it taps for colorless mana, so it's not useless if you have 2 of them in play. At least you get some mana. Also, the guild mana activated ability, as opposed to the colorless activated ability, will give you stability on your mana base. I'm really torn. I don't think that it's going to see play, but it's more playable than the other 2.
Cairns?
Let's move on to the next one. Well, Nimbus Maze looks relatively playable, I guess.
Yeah, this card, while, yearning to be a Darkheart Waste or Hollowed Fountain, it isn't that bad unless you have it in your opening hand or it's your only land drop. But I mean, when's the first time you've ever seen drop an island, play Flying Men, and say go?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of white-blue aggro out there for this to, screw up. I mean, it seems playable, and since Counterspell isn't in the current Type 2 environment, and the best counterspells are a colorless and a blue, having an island and a Nimbus Maze in play as your first 2 land drops really isn't that bad, so...
Yeah, it's a pretty good turn 2 drop. I can only see problems if you're getting opening hands with 2 of them.
Yeah, that's really the only problem with it. But we'll just have to wait and see on this one also.
Finally, a good one.
Yeah, I know. It's about time. This is the saving grace of this cycle of lands. Without this one, I would have been very disappointed in Wizards, but this is actually pretty playable. I mean, it's strictly better than Brushland as far as I'm concerned. It's just going to replace Brushland entirely.
Yeah, the only problem I see is it doesn't tap for colorless mana, but, I mean, you're not going to play it with Brushland that much. It's probably just going to replace it.
Yeah, and I really want to see the day when this is played in conjunction with Crucible of Worlds, because that's just a card draw every turn.
Cairns? Alright, so that's all for us this week.
Yep, Evan will be back full-time next week. Thanks for putting up with us. I'm Reuben Bresler.
And I'm Nick Miller.
Tapping the cards so Evan doesn't have to.
Right.
Cairns?
Cairns?